Okay, hello everybody. Thanks for coming to automate your workflow using Tableau Server and the REST API. This session is going to be an introduction to the Tableau REST API and the Tableau Server Client to help you guys learn about how to use our automated tools. So before we get started, I wanted to start off with a scenario. So let's imagine that we have a time machine and we can travel time into the future. And so let's go to Friday, tomorrow, just after TC. And let's imagine that there's Alice and Bob. They go back to work after TC. They tell their boss, Charlie, how great of a time they had at TC. And data night out was awesome. They learned a lot about Tableau. And they tell Charlie about how great Tableau is. And so Charlie is convinced that they should add 700 more users to Tableau server instance that they have internally. And Charlie says, hey, Alice and Bob, since you guys are in-house experts of Tableau, I'm going to have you guys add 700 new users, create a project for each person, add a workbook for each person, and add them to the right groups. And so Alice and Bob go back to their desks, and they open up Tableau Server, and they look at how to do that. And they realize this is going to take a long time, and Charlie wants it done by Monday so that new users can start first thing in the morning next week. So Alice and Bob have to work overtime on a weekend. So now let's go back to today, and let's imagine that Alice and Bob are in this session today. How can we help so that they can actually enjoy their weekend? My name is Chris. I'm a software engineer at the developer platform team, and I'm here with my mentor, Ong, today to talk about it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ong. I'm also a software engineer in the developer platform team. So last year, we've been giving a similar talk related to this session. And then also, as you might not know, Chris has been, the Tableau Server Client library is his intern project. So he started all this by himself during like 3-month period, during a 3-month period of time, which is pretty impressive. And also, he's the go-to expert for TSC. And before we dive into the detail, I want to quickly go over some logistic items. First, this session is supposed to be introductory and intermediate level. So we will go over some high-level concepts and also go over some code. So as long as you don't fall asleep while seeing the code, I think we are good to go. Or not too hangover from last night's party. Yeah. And then the second thing is, if you have any questions, feel free to save it till the end of the session. We'll have a dedicated Q&A time. And also, if you are some advanced user that already know many of the REST API or TSC stuff, and then you have a very dedicated advanced question, we will welcome you to come to our Tableau lab down in the data village that we have constantly staffing people there within our team that will help you to answer all of your questions. So now let's dive into the actual content. So firstly, I'd like to go over the overall developer platform landscape to help you understand what you can do as a developer to help your customers or to help your companies using Tableau. So firstly, you can use JavaScript API to help you embed your Tableau visits into your customized portal. And also, we have launched an extension API earlier this year to help you build a dashboard extension, which enables a lot more possibilities that you can interact with the third-party web application. And also, we have the web data connector that will allow you to implement your customized data connector, the customized data connectivity. And also, we have the TabPy and R integration so that you can use Tableau to integrate into your data science platform. And lastly is the automation, so which is our focus today. And then we will be talking about the REST API and TSC. So some quick agenda. You would learn what are the Tableau Server REST API is, and also what is the Tableau Server Client library. And then there will be a whole bunch of demo that we're going to help Alice and Bob to build a whole workflow in an automated way. So we have split Charlie's request into 4 different steps. So firstly, Alice and Bob needs to add the new user to the right site and the right group. And also, they need to create a project as a playground for the new users to explore and learn. And also, Alice Bob has to publish a workbook so that the new users would follow the tutorial and to learn how to basically to ramp up how to use Tableau. And lastly, in order to impress Charlie, Alice and Bob decided to go some extra miles to see how to subscribe the new users to their workbooks so that they can get daily updates or weekly updates through the email. And as we said, all this could be done in an automated way, and then we're going to show you step by step. So first, what is REST? So REST stands for Representational State Transfer. One of the fun facts is, even you know the full name, it doesn't really mean anything. So I like to say the REST API is letting you making API requests or API calls through the HTTP protocol. And in order for using the HTTP protocol, firstly, you need to make the decision what kind of request you want to make. So you need to decide what kind of HTTP word you want to use. So basically, the HTTP supports all the basic CRUD operations. It's create, read, update, and delete. So for instance, here, if you want to create an item in the server, you need to send a POST request. If you want to read something, you will need to send a GET request. If you want to update some item, you will need to send a PUT request, and then you will send a delete request for deleting an item. So once you know what kind of action you want to take, the next question is what kind of item you want to be the action to be taken on. So here we are. So in order to do that, you need to provide a URL that's indicating the URI or the endpoints that the HTTP verb is going to be working on. So here we can see we are aiming for the server with the API version 3.1, and then pointing to the sites, following with a specific site ID, and then followed by the endpoints called users. So this basically means we want to work on users on this specific site on this Tableau server. So, so here, if you send a POST request to this endpoint, it's going to be like creating a new user. If you send a GET request, it's going to be query how many users are under these sites. And then if you send a pull request, it's basically going to update the user for you. And then if you send delete, it's going to just delete the users within these sites. So there's also optional payload data that you can provide for this HTTP request, especially for the post and pull requests that you need to provide the actual payload to let the server know what kind of data that you want the server to take in. It could be in XML or JSON. As you can see here, we are providing a user object named Alice, and the side row is Explorer. So to be exact, what is Tableau Server REST API? For those of you hearing this for the very first time, you might be wondering what it is and what it can do. So in short, Tableau Server REST API lets you programmatically manage and change Tableau Server resources without going through the Tableau Server UI. Almost all the functionalities that you have through the Tableau Server VizPortal websites, you can done them using the REST API. For instance, you can query the users for this specific site. You can also publish Workbook without going through the Tableau desktop UI. And also, you can use the REST API to manage different sites, projects, user permissions, and lots of other things. And one thing I want to point out is this Tableau Server REST API not only works on the Tableau on-prem server, it also works for Tableau Online. And also, we have I believe we just launched an alpha for the Tableau Server Management REST API. If you guys know it, it's called TSM REST API. And this is kind of a different set of REST APIs here we're talking about. And then I think, so to be honest, we are kind of bad at naming things. We like to use the protocol to naming our APIs. So we are seriously considering changing this in the following releases so that it becoming clearer for the users. Yeah, thank you. So So now let's talk about what kind of scenarios is good for REST API. Firstly, it's good for embedded analytics. It can be used with these JavaScript API if you know them, so that you can use the REST API to embed your Tableau visits into your customized portal or the mobile application, and then you can handle the user login and then handling all the token or getting the preview image for your customized portal so that you can show specific viz within that portal without going through the Tableau server. And also you can use it for content auditing to ask questions like how many users are actively publishing workbooks for this server, or how many workbooks are currently under this project. And third, you can use it for workflow integration so that you can make Tableau as part of your ETL process. For instance, you can trigger extract refresh while the underlying data is updated. And lastly, you can use it for enterprise-level automation, which is our main focus today. Now let's take a look at a typical REST request. Here, we have composed a raw request to create a group in Tableau Server. There are 4 major components. The first one, in green, is the URI or the endpoints. Here, as you can see, we are pointing to the specific site and asking for the groups. Second is the HTTP verb. Here, we're using post for creation. Third is a very critical part. It's a security token that Tableau Server REST API are required you to send for all the requests to let the server to identify who you are. And you can retrieve this token once after the user signs in, and then this token could be found in the REST response. And lastly is the data payload. Here we are setting the group name to be TC18. So now let's take a look at a demo. So there are 2 steps. Firstly, we're going to add the user to the site, and also we're going to add the user to the group. So for those of you are unfamiliar with REST API, I would recommend to use an application called Postman. We internally use it a lot for our development because it's really easy to use. You don't have to compose the string, all of them every time. And also you can use this kind of GUI to save some of the collections that you use frequently. And so as you can see here, I have saved a sign-in request. And here we can choose different kind of HTTP verb. Since we're gonna do a sign-in, it's gonna be a post request. And as you can see, here is the URL that we're gonna send to. It's pointing to my localhost server with API version 3.1. And if you go to the message body, we have created a credential item with a name called admin and password 123. And then there's a sub-item called site to indicate which site you want this user to be logged in. Here, I leave it blank to make sure we are logging into the default site. And now let's click send. So here you can see we got the 200 response, which means login success. And this is the security token that I've previously talked about. And also here is the site ID for the default site. This is the user ID for this server admin. So now let's copy the security token. So once the user logged in, now we're going to actually add the user to the site. As we said before, in order to create the user, you're going to send another post request and indicating for which site this user is going to be created. Here, I'm using a Postman function called variables, so that as long as we provide this kind of a macro, it will be replaced and remembered for all the following requests, so you don't have to copy-paste them everywhere for all of the requests that you're going to be using. And similarly, as you can see here, we are providing the security token in a header. And for simplicity, I also put them as a token variable. So here, to modify the variables, I'm simply copy-pasting the token right here. And also I think the user ID is fine. And now let's take a look at the message body. It's a user item with the name Charlie, site role called Explorer. Now let's click send. So now it's the response is 201, means created. And here is the new user has been created with the user ID and the username. So here, let me quickly just replace the user ID here too. So as you know, for Tableau Server, if we have like different authentication types that could be configured. If you are using Active Directory or SAML or something similar, this is after this add user to the site, you are good to go, because all the user information like the email or the credentials are delegated to the third-party identity provider. So here, and then that should be good. But since we are using the local auth, which means we are using Tableau Server to serve as the identity provider, which means the Tableau Server will need to know the username, password, and the email address, and then the Tableau Server would encrypt them, save them locally. And in order to do that, there's one more step we need to do to finish the add user to the site. And that is the next request, going to be update user. And the URL, as you can see, is slightly different because we are now working on a specific user, so we need to provide a user ID following the user's endpoints. And very similarly, the security token is putting in the header, and we can reuse the same token. I think by default, it times out after like 4 hours, but the server admin can change that configuration. Yes, can change their configurations. And then as you can see, the message body here, we're providing a full name, an email, and also a password. Did I update the user ID? Yes. Yes, so now I think we are good to go. Oh, and one more thing, as you can see, for update, we are sending a pull request, which is different than the previous two. Sorry. So now the user is updated, and then we can say complete the addition to the server. And if we hop back to the site, we can see Charlie has been added to the site. And next step is we need to add the user to the specific group. So here we have already created a group called TC18. So we're going to use the group ID directly. And you can see the URL is slightly different because the structure is kind of has changed. So we are asking for the specific site. Within the site, we are looking for the groups. And then within that specific group, we are working on the users. So that's how the URL is composed. And as you might already get familiar with, the security token is here. The message body is simply just providing the user ID to show, OK, we want to add this user to this site. So now once the send, you can see the users is got a reply back. And if we hop back to the server, you can see in this group, Charlie has been added. So this is how we send requests and see the response through the Postman, which is pretty convenient. But as you can see, there's a lot of like back and forth, copy pasting. It's kind of tedious for sending all this. So I like to invite Chris back to talk to you how to use TSC to help you automate all of this. And here is supposed to be a transition slide. So as you might know, we just announced the Tableau program, the Tableau developer program, and we are highly recommend everyone to join the program because we're gonna have like bi-weekly sprint demo to show what has been working on by our teams, and also you will get the latest access to all the new features that we are building. Also, there will be a a free online site, just provisioned for all of the developers that's been enrolled in this program so that you can try out all those new APIs, new functionalities for free. So please join this. And yeah, and back to Chris.
Okay, so let's get into Tableau Server Client. So what exactly is Tableau Server Client? Well, Tableau Server Client, TSC for short, is a client library that's written in Python. And it's a wrapper around the REST API, so it uses the REST API for you so that you can write Python code that uses the REST API in a more intuitive way. It basically handles all the plumbing work for you. So for example, you saw on Postman, you have to sign in first, copy that authentication token, copy all the IDs. All of those can be done in Python by using variables, and so you don't have to do it manually. And also, from Postman, you saw that we have raw XML. It also takes JSON. But you have to write it yourself. You have to parse it when you get a response back. So if you get, if you have like 100 workbooks on server, and you query for all of them, it's not easy to see all of them in one giant XML. With its intuitive API design, the TSC does all of that for you seamlessly. It's also available on PyPy, which is the Python global repository. So if you want to download the latest version of TSC, all you have to do is go to terminal, type in pip install Tableau Server Client, assuming you have pip installed. And lastly, it's an open source project. If you go to our GitHub page, github.com/Tableau, you can find it under Server Client Python. And there you can submit issues, pull requests, or if you see anything that you want to improve on, you can fork your branch and make some changes to the code because all of our source code is available on GitHub. Okay, so let's see what it looks like. So I prepared a demo for creating a project by using the TSC library. So this is the code for creating a project using TSC. Assuming that we already have Tableau Server Client installed onto your local machine, you can open up a Python script and just import Tableau Server Client as TSC, and it'll be ready to use in your script. Next step is to do all the authentication. As you can see in the line text, those are all the variables that you need to fill out, depending on your server environment, admin user, and password. So the first thing we do is instantiate the server object from TSC library, and you pass in the server address. Second step is to call server that use server version, and that's going to ask your server instance what version of the REST API that you should be using, and it's going to set it for you, so you never even have to know what version you're supposed to be using. So in Postman, you saw that every endpoint had a version in it. Now you don't have to know what version it is. Third thing is to instantiate the Tableau auth object. This object takes in a username and password of the admin user. And then the last thing is to actually sign in. So server.auth.sign in. So you're saying, hey, server, get the auth endpoint and sign in for me using the Tableau auth object that you've provided on line 3, or line 3 of the box. The last step is to actually create the project after you log in. So first thing is to create a local project item out of the TSC library. And that takes in a project name and a description of the project that you want to create. And the next step, you have to tell server, hey, I want to create this new project based on the variables that I passed into the local project item. So now that Alice and Bob knows how to add a user, add them to the group, and create a project, let's get into publishing a workbook. But before I get into the TSC code, let's take a look at what are the challenges of using the REST API directly for publishing a workbook. So first of all, for publishing a workbook using the REST API directly, you have to deal with multi-part XML request. And for those of you who are not familiar with multi-part, it looks something like this. So in the colored text is the request body. It's pretty similar to the ones we've seen before. But the white text is going to be the extra part that you need to add on to the request. So on the bottom, you can see there's the content of the workbook file, and you have to somehow put it in there make sure there's no typos, make sure all of the semicolons and quotation marks are correct, and then send it into Tableau server instance so that server knows what to create. Second challenge is if you have a workbook that's over 64 megabytes, you can't send that in one request because it's just too big. That means you have to chunk it into different parts and submit 64 megabytes at a time. So if you have like a 200 megabyte workbook, it's going to take a lot of requests to send this individually. Lastly, if you were to do this in Python, it takes over 300 lines of code just to publish. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So this is a Python script that's written to use the REST API directly to publish a workbook. As you can see, you have to do all of the multi-part XML requests on your own, so there's a method for that. You have to check the status that's returned from the server to make sure there's no errors, or you have to do the error handling yourself. You also have to sign in. You have to sign out, start the upload session. This is for chunking the data. This is too much code. So let's go over to the TSC code for publish workbook. This is it. As you can see, we're down to 13 lines of code, and that's including spaces and some print line statements. This is very similar to the one we saw for creating a project. First thing you have to do is import Tableau Server Client so that your script knows what library to use. The second part here is the authentication. So for this example, I'm going to actually put in working server environment. We call use server version, so it's going to call the server for us and ask for the version that we should be using and set the version for future requests. Admin username is going to be just admin, and admin password is 123. For the purpose of this demo, we're showing you the password, but obviously in a real life situation, you probably wouldn't want password exposed on a script. So you can use Python libraries that ask you for the password on the command line when you run it, and it won't show the password. And if you have questions, you can ask about that later. So after we sign in, we want to create a new workbook item locally first. So here we have new workbook equals tsc.workbook item. And that takes in the name of the workbook that you want to publish and the project ID. So in this case, let's just name it TC18, workbook. This is a name that will show up on server. It's not the file path of the workbook itself. And for project ID, if you leave it blank, it'll find the default project on your site, and it'll publish it directly to that project. Next part on line 9 is the publish mode. So for workbook, there's two modes. You can create a new one, or you can overwrite. In this case, we can just create a new one, and we have some enums inside the TSC library. The last part is to tell server that we want to publish this locally created workbook item. So we say server.workbooks to get that endpoint, and then we call publish within the workbook endpoint. And we pass in the new workbook item that we've created above, and then the workbook path. So in this case, we have a sample twibx file ready on the same directory as this script. And the last thing is the publish mode that you want to specify, and we have that on line 9. So let's actually run this. Go here and say Python publish workbook.py. Did you click save? I did. So if we run this, it's going to run that script, and it's going to publish that workbook to the default site, depending on the variables that we passed in. And it prints out the ID for us, which will be useful later. OK, so let's go back to the slides. Now, Alice and Bob know how to do all of the steps that are required for Charlie's demands. But they, like we said, they want to go above and beyond and prove that they are, in fact, the in-house experts of Tableau to Charlie. So they want to subscribe every user that they've created to the workbook that each user owns in their own project. So this is the script for, change it to this. And so this is a script for creating a subscription. It's very similar to what we've seen so far. It's a little bit different. It has a little bit more steps to it. But I'll skip the first couple parts because we've already seen it. So it's already predefined. Let's go into the line number 8, where we actually have a for loop. So for subscriptions on Tableau Server, you have to put the subscriptions inside of a schedule that's already predefined in the Schedules tab. And a subscription can be for either a view or a workbook. And in this case, we have to first find the schedule to put that subscription into. So let's just say that we want to put it into the schedule called Monday morning. So every Monday morning, users come into work and they get an email about the workbook that they're subscribed to. So this is just a simple for loop. It goes through every single schedule on site, and we have a pager, built-in pager object that deals all of the pagination item for you. So if you have 160 schedules on server, if you were to use the REST API directly, you only get 100 unless you specify different page sizes. In this case, it'll just give us a pager that can iterate through all 162, so you don't have to do any extra steps to iterate through different pages. So we go through each schedule item, and we check if the name is equal to this variable. And since we want the Monday morning, we can just type in Monday morning here. And if it matches the schedule, it'll grab that ID so we can use it later on. The next thing is to define this target. This target is a wrapper around either a view or a workbook that you want to subscribe to. And it takes in the ID of the target and the type of the target. So in this case, target ID is going to be the workbook item that we've just published. So I've copied that earlier, so I can put it in here directly. And the target type is going to be workbook, not a view in this case, because we published the workbook. Next step is to create the subscription item itself that takes in some information about the subscription. So first thing is the subject. Let's just name it TC18 subscription. It takes in the schedule ID. That's going to be the ID of the Monday morning schedule. So we want to put it in there. And then we specify the user ID for who's going to get this subscription. So let's go back to Postman real quick, because we've created Charlie. Copy this ID, go back, and then replace user ID with the ID of Charlie. The last thing it takes is the target item itself. The last thing is to say, hey, server, give me the subscriptions endpoint, and then create the subscription using the subscription item that we've created locally. And this is the part that's actually going to talk to server and publish it up to your server instance. Let's run this one. Create subscription. If we run it, it tells us that a new subscription has been created, and it just prints out the ID of it. So let's go to server real quick and just check that it's worked properly. Schedules. We added to the Monday morning schedule, so we'll go in there, and we have Charlie Brandon. It has subscribed to TC18 workbook. That's the workbook that we published. Subject is TC18 subscription. It's done as we expected it to. So now that we've covered all of the parts, all the 5 parts that Alice and Bob need, let's put that all together into one script so we can do that in one go. All of the steps, from adding user, adding them to group, creating a project, publishing workbook, and subscribing in one script. So here, I've combined all of the steps that we've talked about so far into separate methods. So above, we have like create subscription. That's the same thing we saw. We have publish workbook. It's the same stuff. But they're all in methods now, so that we can link together all of them together. And whenever we publish a workbook and get information back from server, we use that information without copying pasting to continue on to the script. So here are some of the variables that we've talked about before. So first of all, we have authentication variables. These are all the server information. New user variables. Let's add a new user named Danny. Site role is going to be Explorer, email, password, and then the group to add is TC18, as Ong said. And project variables take in name and description, so we've specified that here. And then we've specified the workbook name and path, schedule Monday morning. And then here is the code that actually runs all of the 5 methods in one go based on what we get back from the previous requests. So for the purpose of this demo, we've hard-coded everything. But you can imagine that if you have like an Excel spreadsheet of all the users, all the new users that you have to add, you just need to have the specific names and emails that you want to specify and run this script in a loop. And it's going to add all 700 users based on the information you provide, just in one go. So if we run this, it's going to tell us Danny added, user added to the TC18 group, project's been created for her, TC18 workbook is published to that project, and the user is subscribed to the workbook under Monday morning. Let's go check out the server. So we actually, I forgot to mention this, but we actually use the TC18 site, which is a different site we have on server. So if you go here, we see that Danny's project has been created, has one workbook called TC18 workbook. If you go to users, we have Danny added as an explorer, and she's in 2 groups, one of which is TC18. And then if you go to schedules, the last thing is Monday morning, we have a subscription for Danny. So like I said, this was just one example of a flow. But if you use the REST API and the TSC together, you can create other workflows that are applicable to your environment. And you might be wondering at this point, if we have the TSC and if it's so much easier to code with, why do we have the REST API? Well, the REST API, if you use it directly, it requires some copy pasting and a lot of manual work, but it's really good for one-off requests. So if you want to just check how many workbooks are on server, you can just use Postman to run that request real quick, and you can just get a whole bunch of information about what's on your server. And if you don't care about parsing it and looking at the ID, you can do that real quick. But you would want to use the TSC if you want to do publishing easily, or if you want to link all of these flows together into one script so that you can have one script that does all of the things based on the variables you pass in.
Okay, so that's the content for today. And before we go into the Q&A session, we want to give you guys some more resources. Like for this folder, it's going to contain all the slides and sample code that on all the developer track sessions throughout this whole TC18. And also, this is the link for the developer program. And as we said before, we highly recommend everyone to join this program and then share the feedbacks. And also, Tableau has a home on GitHub, so we will have open source projects, samples, and tutorials, all lives in GitHub. So we will come back to these slides for pictures later. And there are some more related sessions. Some of them I already passed, but. And also, we like to ask everyone to review our sessions through the app. And then, yeah, now let's open for questions. Yes, please.
Is there a mechanism for the REST API to get a list of sites?
The question is if there's a mechanism for REST API to get a list of sites. The answer is yes. So you can simply send a GET request and then to the sites endpoint, and that's going to return you the list of sites with some basic metadata, some basic fields.
Do we authenticate against any site in order to be able to access that first?
So that will depend on the admin credentials. So if you are using server admin, certainly you can ask for all the sites on the server. If it is site admin, probably just only the site that the site admin has permission to. And yes, please.
What about Active Directory integrated authentication?
So yeah, the question is what about the authentication for Active Directory? So the answer is currently for REST API, we don't support the Active Directory. Oh, no, I think we do, actually.
You do, you just don't supply a password.
Yeah, it just takes in different parameters based on the authentication methods. But we definitely have the capability and documentations on that, so you can check that out.
Yeah. And there's a very comprehensive reference doc that if you Google, just simply Google Tableau Server REST API reference, I think that the first two links would all be pointing to the right place. And then they have very in detailed sign-in flow, shows you some example code for how to use REST API, sending either using the XML or JSON, and how to use the security token following. Yeah. Any more questions? Yes, please.
So one of those commands, does that work for refreshing workbooks as well? The task?
The question is, does those commands work for the refresh workbooks?
Yep.
So when you say refresh workbooks, does it mean like refresh the extract?
Yes.
Yes, we do have that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there a mechanism to map LUID back to like a URL? For example, I want to pull and work on a workbook or project, and now I want that URL back from it. So maybe to publish to an email subscription, something like that.
Can you please rephrase your question?
I'm working with a project, and I'm iterating through all those projects, let's say that, or workbook, or whatever. And now, as part of this script, I want to generate a list of those projects as URLs as they appear on the server. Is there a way to map that object ID back to the relevant URL to then display to the user the relevant URL?
Yeah.
So currently, the REST API wouldn't give you the full URL, but it'll give you a content URL. So whatever the workbook name is based on the content URL. It'll give you the content URL, so you can create a URL with your server information added into it. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I believe for many of the objects, like a project and workbooks, in the response, you will see the LUID, which is the project ID, and then you can use that as well. Yeah.
Even within the web API?
Based on the specific URL, like for site, you can provide a site/site ID / like users. So that ID is the same LUID. Yeah. Any more questions? Oh, yes, please.
Do you know if anybody's working on a port of this to powering up?
So the question is if there's a plan to port the TSC to PowerShell.
Or anybody in the community is working on it?
So I know within Tableau, I heard like someone is like working on his projects during the hackathon, but I don't know if there's any plan to officially launch it or public them. And if I believe like if they are reaching the production quality, we like to open source them and let the community to contribute. And for now, that's more like a one-man project for now, and I don't have any like answers for that yet. Sorry about that. Yeah. Yes, please.
How closely are these tracked with the releases of Tableau Server? In other words, is there a lag between when TSC is updated versus the Tableau Server?
Sorry, what is your question? Like,
So as you release a new version of Tableau Server,
yeah.
is there any lag between when the TSC code is updated to match and add those new features or those changes to the API?
So the question is if there's any time gap between the TSC to catching up the new features that's been released as the new Tableau server. The answer is yes, there will be some lagging because there, we are like so some of the new items is some of the endpoints is provided by us. Like we just add those when there's a new REST endpoints coming up, And sometimes there are like a community is contributing, making those changes, and then we have to merge those pull requests. And then based on the priority, sometimes we are working on some internal features that doesn't necessarily have a REST endpoints outside. So yeah, something might be missing in the TSC, but the majority thing is there already. And then if you see something missing, certainly just create a defects or merge.
Issue on GitHub.
Yeah, an issue in GitHub.
But it doesn't typically break anything because you can use an older API string in order to hit a newer server, correct?
Oh yeah. We took the backward compatibility very seriously. We don't want to break any users when launching new versions. And then if there's any such a thing happen, and then we certainly will send out a clear warning saying like, if you are hop onto this version, please make sure you have modified the script in a certain way so that you don't get broken. Yeah. Any more questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And have fun for the last day of TC. Thank you.